topic is the current moment of imperialism and possible responses from the South. How are we supposed to respond from the South against this current unveiling and unmasking of power?
I'm glad to participate in these discussions. I'm definitely starting to feel my age. But people tell me that I'm still looking young. I don't know why. Yeah? Oh, well, that is always tested. It's good as the last performance. Yeah, but the topic has given to me the current moment of imperialism and possible reactions from the South. I felt that to identify the current moment, it might be useful to contextualize the concept a bit, because that helps people to have perspective. Otherwise, they could be all over the place in relation to what we might be seeking to get to the center of. The concept of imperialism, to keep it not too complicated, it has two basic elements. One with a long history in humankind, and the other more recent in terms of modern society. The long historical association with the term is with conquest and domination and settlement and taking over of territory and the oppression of people and so on. And when mankind was became more integrated, especially since the 19th century, and into the 20th century, and particularly in the 20th century, especially the early part of the 20th century, you got a kind of economic manifestation of the term, which became dominant right up to, let's say, almost our period or time. And this is best manifested in what is called finance capital, the capital that's associated with things like banking and trade and so on. And you can have domination and corporations and so on. You can get domination there where the old features of the imperialism seem to have stepped back a bit, so that you don't see people inside your country. As I am old enough to have seen a British civil servant walking about with a white helmet and feathers, and everybody seeing him as the dominant person in Barbados. It might surprise some of you younger ones that I could have actually a physical memory of that, but I do. I mean, the governor, before they had the thing called Governor General, he was a white Englishman, usually a civil servant that they put into military dress, and he got on like a soldier in that kind of way. He used to go on parades and all that, and he had this big white helmet. Sometimes the clothes were black too, like admiral clothes, but he had this big white helmet with feathers in his cap. But that whole thing can withdraw in a sense, and you can still get a kind of containment domination of your development on the basis of tremendous influence through money and corporations and banking and so on. And that is where the dominance of finance capital came about. So that those are the two aspects that we are most easily familiar with in terms of imperialism. The first one is normally called colonialism, and it involves that domination physically, and sometimes it involves settlement, where people come and take over your territory and all that. And you will see that some of that reoccurs even in contemporary. When you hear a man like the present president of the United States saying that he wants Greenland and he wants Canada, this is the language of the old colonialists, But before we get into that, I just want to say in contextual terms that in the 20th century, we have had global systems in relation to this phenomenon. Largely, there was a struggle in the 20th century between what is called the capitalist world and liberal democratic world. And from the early 20th century, what became known as the communist world, and it was also called socialist. And the two of those fought for most of the 20th century. And a part of the struggle was actually an anti-colonial struggle as well, and a struggle of resistance, one being associated more with the other. In the middle of that, we had the rise of some very aggressive, domineering politics, which was given the category titled fascism. And the fascism largely came out of the movement of a guy called Mussolini in Italy, but the person that was most associated with it was Adolf Hitler in Germany. And his version was really called, in a very confusing way, National Socialism. And the short version of that was Nazism. But what you saw in its essence is the consistency of it with the fascists of Italy. Hitler wrote everything that he intended to do in relation to his domination of the world. First of all, he saw Europe as the center of the world. He saw what he called the Aryans as the center of mankind. He claimed that they were the superior people and therefore did everything that was positive in human existence. It came out of a theory called Lebensraum, in which Germany was at the center of it. And he was planning to take over the whole of Europe, and then extended from Europe, he'd take over everything else. Of course, one of his big operations was the anti-Jewish thing that he carried out, which is called the Holocaust, in which he murdered millions of Jews, and which we are still having consequences of. But and that caused World War II. And in World War II, a strange thing happened, which I am going to bring back to the moment that we are talking about, the current moment, in relation to understanding that in World War II, we had this fascist movement up by people like Hitler, Mussolini, Franco in Spain, and were able to draw in the Japanese and give them some kind of honorary status in terms of dominating Asia. And against them, against that, what we for convenience would call fascist movement, you had an alliance of liberal democratic capitalists, what we call liberal democratic capitalists. That is to say, countries like, a lot of them had lost their independence because the Germans took them over, like France. But we had outside of it, importantly, United States, Canada, all those countries that we normally associate with liberal democracy. And an important and critical part of that alliance was the Soviet Union, which was called communist. And we have to keep that in mind in relation to the struggle of power as distinct from the struggles of ideology, because it became obvious, and if you listen to somebody like a Churchill, that in order to defeat fascism and the Germans, he needed communist power. And at the same time, he was one of the most anti-communist people on the face of the earth. But he was in alliance, this liberal Democrat, heroic, quote-unquote, Prime Minister of Great Britain during the war, with Roosevelt from United States, aligned against Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and the Japanese and so on. And these two camps fighting each other, but this strange set of bedfellows on one side, liberals and communists. How come? But that is what it took then to defeat fascism. And it is said that the people that reached Berlin first was the Soviet Red Army. The Soviet Red Army reached Berlin first, and that's why they can't find, up to now, they can't find the remains of Adolf Hitler. But we know about the whole story about the bunker and all that went on there. But I'm just saying that to show what happened in relation to mobilizing the force necessary to stop fascism. I remember that with fascism, very central to fascism is racism. That racism was aimed at the Jews, but coming after the Jews would have been a whole set of people. They actually had a little saying that a lot of you would know the quotation about the first came first for this body, they came first for the next body, and then, you know, they will come next for you. And part of the people that will come next for would have been black people. It is clear that those guys had no reason to save Africa from the whole solution. And it is just that one of the weakest parts of their alliance, the Italians, tried to take on Africa. First, they did it twice. The first one with not Mussolini, the first one before Mussolini, they wanted to grab a piece of Africa, and they went for Ethiopia, which was the last remaining independent. And Ethiopians, well, I almost said Buster, what, you know? But we will leave it out without finishing that expression. But that is what they heroically did. But then again, in the Second World War, big part of the battles were fought in North Africa. And we see that, and there's a history of grabbing Africa. Africa, as most of you should know, the richest continent, or the richest continent on the face of the earth, the original center of mankind, and so on. And many Europeans would tell you in their more drunk moods that we could not live the way that we are living if the Africans could live better. So the thing is that you have to keep the Africans as primary producers, primary facilitators of exploitation of the resources, so that they can live the way that they live in Europe. Anyhow, there's a distinction in terms of how you do that is covered by the liberal Democrats, and that is why I would say that they have this association, this strange bedfellow with the liberal Democrats actually in alliance with the communists against the fascists. And that is how World War II played out. After World War II, a bipolar global system continues. Essentially, the struggle between the Soviet Union and the United States. And the United States is actually carrying a kind of anti-colonial role there, because the United States anti-colonial role goes back 250 years to its foundation, where it threw out the British. And therefore, it played a part after World War II of almost defending decolonization. Matter of fact, Grantley Adams, when he went to the United Nations and was asked to speak on behalf of the British, he got a whole lot of cursing when he came back to Barbados because he had done that. And one of the set of people that would not have understood why he was playing that role would have been the Americans. But we know that America itself is founded in the colonial domination and genocide of the indigenous people of the Americas. So that is an extremely good example of what colonialism can do. And one of the most horrific experiences, apart from that of Africa, is what happened to the indigenous people of the Americas. I mean, the Africans at least were able to survive. A lot of the indigenous people of the Americas were just wiped out. They were wiped out at more than one level too. You know, they were wiped out militarily, but they were also wiped out by disease. And they were wiped out by maltreatment, and then their minds was completely, and I will get in trouble for saying this started by the dominance of the Roman Catholic Church, I mean, especially the southern part of America now. If you want to delete that, you can delete that, because you're not supposed to say things like that, okay? But when you go into Latin America, the Catholic Church has its best manifestation all through Latin America, and a lot of the people that are members of the Catholic Church are the indigenous people. they also fool you about that in colonialism. You go down to a place like Chile, and you're given the impression that Chile is a white country. But if you go to Chile and walk through the capital of Chile, you just see indigenous people walking all over the place. But they're invisible. You go to Argentina, and people tell you the history of Argentina. There was a large section of Argentina that had people of African descent. Where are they now? They were wiped out by genocide. So there's a kind of internal colonialism too that goes on in terms of racial prejudice. And then there's the colonialism that went on at the settlement. This is settlement colonialism, now settlement imperialism that went on in North America, where they just push the indigenous people back into what are called reservations. Now that bipolar system and that anti-colonial struggle continues after World War II, and you get successes to the point where you can talk about a post-colonial system in reference to the development and history of colonialism and imperialism. There's a post-colonial period which we are part of. It starts in the modern era with places like India, and then it goes into West Africa, led by Ghana, and then it comes down to places like the West Indies, and you get Jamaica and Trinidad and Barbados and Guyana and so on and so forth. And all of that is called post-colonial, and it's a part of the modern development of the imperialist system and the reversals against it. And then I'm going to jump a bit now and say that you get a collapse of that bipolar system as we come into the latter part of the 20th century, around the 1990s. And again, a strange association. It is identified with the collapse of what had dominated 20th century struggles of development and anti-colonialism, the collapse of the Soviet Union. And you get a collapse of the bipolar system and the rise of a unipolar system, and associated with that, something called, that has been given the name and category, neoliberalism. And associated with neoliberalism, the term globalization. And associated with all of that is a whole set of free trade activity and a changing of our economic behavior and economic practices that were radical. And for somebody, again, like me, who lived from the colonial period and from the period of social democracy with people like a lot of the anti-colonial leaders and so on, this was a shocker. Because now you're told that capitalism is the best thing for the world and free market is the best thing for the world, and you mustn't interfere with these people, give them free hands. The whole world is one world. With globalization, you must have this free trade. But in the center of that, you see a certain domination of that system by particular groups of people. And essentially, they are the same people that were the colonial masters in the past, but now joined by the former anti-colonial champion, the United States, coming dominant, especially after World War II, dominant in that system. That went on, unfortunately for somebody like me, for 30 years. So when, as a young person, I thought I was going to see the transformation of the world into something progressive, and I went and committed myself to radical organization and so on. And then everything got blown up in the 90s. And for 30 years of the rest of my life, adult life, I was faced with people that I wanted to get rid of being dominant and defining what the world would be like. And I had to sit down and suffer that. And I suppose that's why my knees are giving me trouble now. But I don't regret one bit of the struggle that I put up. But I'm just saying this now in a very personal way as to what happened with the rest of us, that the world became dominated by this thing called neoliberalism, and it dominated the world, and some of us don't realize how long it dominated the world for approximately 30 years. Once they got the Soviet Union to fall because of a lot of its mistakes, because it made a lot of mistakes in the 20th century, as C.R.R. James would say, it essentially was a petty bourgeois revolution, and all the petty bourgeois revolutions of the 20th century have failed, including the ones that they call socialist. And the Soviet Union failed dramatically at the human level. But remember, a part of that failure at the human level is what we call the authoritarianism in the system. And we're coming back to deal with that authoritarianism aspect, because it is a nuanced problem for people that are engaged in struggle against heavy power. And it will actually be a part of the current moment of imperialism to understand that phenomenon. So we have this neoliberalism predominant and changing one's existence in the whole world. I used to think that my children would grow up in socialist societies. Well, no way. And all them near the middle age, and it was still neoliberalism. And luckily for me, I lived long enough. I come from a long-living family. My father hit 100. I know I'm not getting there, but nonetheless, I live. Once you live these 3 years and 10 that the Bible tells you, you see enough of the changes of the world to get a pattern, to start to see patterns. Like mathematicians see patterns. When all the rest of us looking at the numbers and they see patterns and can draw. Now, some of them don't even remember the numbers, they remember the equation, how the equation look. Now, I might be going into areas that I have no right going into, but I've been told that by people that say they are experts in these areas, that the way that they are masters of that field is because they see pictures. They don't see numbers. And they can draw patterns then that are very illuminating. So for 30 years of one's life, I lost therefore a lot of my life in that way, but as I said, I don't regret it really. But I thought the world would be quite different. I've actually started to see the collapse of neoliberalism. The cracks have appeared. And some of them in strange ways, and surprising and shocking ways even, because although this would not win the approval of everybody, because you have to have a fairly nuanced understanding of the phenomenon, the appearance, I never thought that I would see a black president of the United States of America. But I lived to see one. And I want to say that the fact that Barack Obama was able to become president of the United States is a manifestation of the crisis of neoliberalism and the starting of the collapse of that system that had dominated the world for 30 years. But I'm not saying that everybody can say it that way, because they say that, he never said anything too strong on behalf of black people. But that is why he became president. So in fact, that is part of his political skill. Very strange political skill, but successful. And I see him now, the other day I saw him next to somebody that was very, very good, that he was taking that stand, which kind of revealed a bit of his inner circle. Like, I remember my father, in his old wisdom, as he approached 100, he looked at me and said, George, all the time I used to think that I had to be behaving well, because he's a very Christian man. He was a priest in his old age. Anglican priest too, so very, 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 very conservative religion, denomination. But he said, George, you mustn't wear your heart on your shoulders. I said, my God, this man was seeing what he was doing all this time and won't tell me a word about it, but he was keeping it inside himself. He's telling me, you are going to hurt yourself. You're going to hurt yourself, boy. Don't wear your heart on your shoulder. But I used to wear my heart on my shoulder. I wasn't afraid to say, this is what I am. And of course, the bash on your head for saying it. I think I paid that price still, and sometimes I wonder if my children are not paying the price too. So we have Obama as a manifestation of a collapsing neoliberalism. And this is happening from 2016, 2020. What you get here now is what we in certain philosophical method see as dialectic. There's going to be a struggle. So you get an Obama, and then my God, you get, anyhow, I take out the my God. You have Obama, and then you have Trump. It's two opposites, in a way. Although people would have to give a lot to Obama to say that he's the opposite of Trump. And in a sense, he's also the same, okay? And this is the complexity thing. Because there's a story that in the southern states, with the Democrats campaigning, these two campaign workers went to a house and they saw two old white Southerners. They knocked on the door. And the woman came out and then she shouted back to the old man, "There are two campaigners for the Democratic Party out here. Who are we voting for?" And the old man said, "Tell them that we're voting for the nigger." And I hope that you understand the significance of that comment. This is a whole hard-back racist, okay? But he wants a nigger to be president. And the reason he wants a nigger to be president is because of the crack in neoliberalism, the crack in that system that was part of globalization and so on. It was cracking. And it was making the American working class and American white people, a lot of them were suffering because of that failure and that breakdown. And they wanted a black magician to mash up the system. And Obama was that black magician. And they used to call his wife the temptress, because some of these white fellas cannot say that a black woman is attractive, you know. They have to say that the black woman tempted them and then overwhelmed them. And then they did what they had to do. And they can help it. And that's what they would tell the wife. Anyhow, I don't know if I gone into fields there that I am not qualified to go into. But I felt that I should add it to this discussion. So you have Trump and you have Obama. Trump is the champion, the billionaire, who is so wealthy and so successful within the neoliberal system that he also can mash it up. And these people who are suffering, who are normally the foot soldiers of it, they don't mind him they don't mind him mashing it up. The black man ain't showing no magic, ain't showing sufficient magic, so it survived. He actually almost strengthened some of the institutions. But now we're going for the white one, the white billionaire, who going to don't obey any rules. It was the most shocking thing to me that a lot of the things that Donald Trump has been able to survive with politically, that 40 years ago, if you looked at a candidate, a political candidate in the United States, if he had done any of those things, his career would be finished immediately. Done. He can't be a presidential candidate anymore. If he was in the primaries, drop out. You're finished. There's a particular fellow, I think Gary somebody or something like that. But anyhow, can't remember his name right now. But they have a fair amount of examples of them that they had to go down. They had to withdraw. But Trump can do almost anything. I don't know if you're going to delete this too. Because that's part of the whole phenomenon of the imperialism as well, that they're telling the press now that they can't say anything. You know, they can't say certain things. And therefore you have to be almost like censoring yourself. But I've always been one that came close on the line of not censoring myself, and I suffer for it too. They chat too much, man. And anyhow, again, I don't regret. So you have that BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa alliance is a manifestation too of the breakdown of that system, that global system that has intentions of dominating the world, which fits again with the definition and the description of the old imperialism, colonialism, and both of them. The old colonialism of settlement and domination of territory and raping of resources, and the finance capital, the dominance in a very disguised and hidden way. And there's that struggle, that dialectical struggle that goes on. And we see it continuing in the Arab uprising, in which certain people paid a tremendous price. Now, I have to be very sure that people get the right message here. Look at somebody like a Gaddafi, in charge of an authoritarian system. But they said that Gaddafi, everybody had an apartment or a house. They had free education, they had free health. They used the oil resources to uplift and defend his people. And he got murdered in the deserts of Libya, facilitated by the people that historically are a part of what we've been defining as colonialism and so on. And liberals as well, and liberal Democrats as well, were involved in that. And it was locked into this Arab uprising, Arab Spring, in which there was a lot of struggle against the authoritarian thing, you know? And therefore we have this tension here now. How do we deal with this thing? An authoritarian who is giving you free education, giving you free housing, giving you free health, but he's an authoritarian. And I want to say that we, for colonial reasons, and I heard Adrian refer to Westminster and all that, and you would know that in the debate on the Republic, I told them, don't stop fussing about whether you could create in Barbados a Cuban system of some revolutionary republic, because if you go that route, you're going to be here for 100 years. Because I know that I wrote a letter about, as a young 20-year-old, in the early 70s, about taking down Nelson, just like how Gabby and all them were talking about it. And it only come down the other day. You understand? All of my life, I spent saying I want Nelson to come down. And then he come down. I see him come down. My God, he come down. But he come down real late. I would like to see him come down ever since. So, in that discussion on the Republic, I said, just move the monarchy out of the way, and you have a republic. But to do that meant that we were retaining a lot of the Westminster system. And I also said that that Westminster system, as white as it is, it represents, and I heard Margaret saying earlier, talking about humanity and so on. Them English people, they're colonialists, but they're human beings too. And they had the struggle, they had Magna Carta and all kind of thing, and they struggled to get the little liberal democracy that they have there, which is not the best system, which is not the perfect system, which has a whole lot of flaws, and it hurts a lot of people. But you have to say, would you want a bureaucratic kind of guy with authoritarian power in his hands, as against a liberal democratic system that is not the best system for mankind, but at least we can struggle within it to protect ourselves when you have a dangerous person operating to do harm to people. Like, let's say right now in the United States, where that thing that is the center of colonialism and imperialism, Trump is doing everything to dismantle the liberal institutions of the United States. And although a lot of them have surrendered, it is the fact that they're there that he ain't doing worse yet. That he ain't a Hitler. Because that's why we call him a neo-fascist, as it's distinct from a fascist. Because with Hitler, all them people wipe out a long time. When you start with ICE and people there talking about one, you kill one, you kill two, you would have killed 1,000. You can't do it. Because you still got a Supreme Court that will, on the rare occasion, go against him. although most of the time they're going for him. So that struggle is going on in the United States, and it's infected the whole globe, as we see now. They caused in what was effectively was really World War III, but nobody ain't calling it that yet. We got the whole world mashup. Probably in a way more serious than us getting a boat torpedoed out in Carlisle Bay by a German submarine. We can get hit with torpedoes all the time, and we can get hit with more if that war in Iran goes on. But that is how the thing is manifesting itself, and the crack in neoliberalism and in the cracking imperialism and colonialism. We are at the point where we have that decline of neoliberalism, and we have a search, because the crack has appeared and the breakdown is occurring, the rise of, I'm going to call it a new revolutionary position. That new revolutionary ideas are appearing. They will not fall under the categories of the old. So don't expect somebody to say that it's just socialism coming back, because it's more than socialism coming back. For instance, the socialism that dominated the 20th century was a socialism that divorced itself from the philosophy of the South. And I heard you all talking about philosophy of Africa. The African philosophy did not sufficiently inform the philosophy of the radical philosophy of most of the 20th century. And that is why you had Stalinism in the Soviet Union, and why the Soviet Union failed. I used to say in my introduction to politics class, tell my students that the leader of the Russian Revolution, Lenin, used to talk about, in terms of dealing with this concept of materialism, that the brain was the highest form of matter, and it could produce thought. And then, more or less, what was a part of his conclusion was, wow, matter is producing thought. Africans have always said that the dialectic should continue. It isn't just that matter produces thought, it's that there's something that is the other of matter, if you want to fulfill the dialectic. And if you have something that is the other of matter, is spirit. So it ain't just that produces that the brain produces thought, is that there's a whole level of existence that is other than matter. And Africa was there all the time. Because the Africans said that they communicated with the spirit world all the time. And that because of the cyclical nature of thought and of existence, you don't have to. Matter of fact, Jesus was saying that too. Tell you the truth. I can come and show you how. You don't have to be waiting to nothing. The thing is there all the time. All the marijuana. And the physicists say that too. The astrophysicists say that. The existence of the universe is now. Is everything. But European epistemology made the break, the distinction in order to control, it is said, if you read somebody like Marimba Ani, to control people, they had to break that. And it went right through the radical tradition within Europe as well, in terms of even Marxism. And that is why Lenin had to say that thought comes out of the brain, and he doesn't say that the other of matter is the spirit. And one of their big philosophers who has said some dangerous things to Hegel, but because he's such a thoroughgoing dialectician, C.L.R. James had a great admiration for him. And I often use this reference to illustrate that point. When he's defining essence, and he says it is essence of anything is not that in itself. It is the process, it is the movement. And he says it's the movement from no thing to no thing. The movement of nothing to nothing. And in the movement from nothing to nothing, you have being. And the mathematicians will understand how to do negatives, right? So the negation of the negation. And that is the third law of dialectics. You have being. And that being is actually just a space suit for us on this planet. And I've come, as I grow older, to recognize fully that it's a space suit, which is why I had surgery on both my knees. It's a damn space suit which you have to put on in order to deal with this environment. and it gets old just like a car. And if you live long enough, it can break up and stall and need oil and all kind of nonsense. Right. And then you have to liberate yourself from it, because the eternal thing is the other. It's not the machine. It's not the thing that you are given to deal with the environment of Earth. And I don't know which planet you're going to next, but I know you're going to another one. And I will get another spacesuit. Okay? So I understand fully what Hegel is saying there in St.R. James, a movement of nothing to nothing. And in the movement from nothing to nothing, you have being. And that is why Marx also said, mors immortalis. Immortal death. And that is why Jesus said, I am the resurrection. And people thought that all he came here to do was to save souls and something else. But they don't tell you that he was, but they didn't tell you that he was also here talking about existence. Existence. What is existence? He said existence is me. If you understand who I am, then you understand what you are. But he wasn't telling them to believe in him as the God. He was saying, I am the resurrection. And when I was given the opportunity in a eulogy on one occasion, not a eulogy, it was to read a lesson at my oldest sister's funeral. I said, and then I stopped for about 4 seconds. I'm the resurrection. And when the priest is coming up with the coffin, he said, I am the resurrection, the life, and the blah, 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 blah. He just roll it off. And all the people saying, right, you're talking about Jesus. But that's what Jesus said. Jesus said it like a Rasta man. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. And what he was saying is that you look at me, and when you believe in me, when you recognize that I am you, in other words, you would know that you are eternal. And that is existence. And my God, the priests don't tell you so. Because it will upset their whole world. You might have to go that too. They would upset the whole world in terms of control. Because a lot of religion is about control. But this is about explanation. When they get up in the pulpit every Sunday, they should be saying those things. What is existence? Where am I going after I leave here? When I take out of this spacesuit, what other spacesuit will I put on? So the last point that I'm going to make then is to deal with this problematic that we have with authoritarianism. At this moment, this struggle with USA and Iran and so on. The Iranian foreign minister just went down to Russia to talk to Putin. The Chinese say, open the strait. Both of those regimes, that's Putin and the Chinese, are said to be authoritarian. The United States has the most powerful military in the history of mankind. There is no power on earth, including the European powers, that can stop Trump if he wanted to just mash up everywhere from mashing up anywhere. You know who can stop him? Russia and China. Who stopped Hitler in World War II? Russia in alliance with the Liberal Democrats. Who are the people quarreling with Trump now because he is mashing up the world? Some of the same Liberal Democrats that make money off us and all the same. Because they know that, as Bob Marley said, they want to mash up the world because they are the people that can lose from enjoying it. I can't remember the exact words I said who you were there earlier trying to say what exactly Bob Marley said. But he said that in one of his songs. You can't tell the time or something in terms of the atomic thing. Right. And it really is saying that they don't dare drop the bomb. So you don't got to fight for them. Because when they drop the bomb, they're mashing up their world. When Trump go and drop nuclear bombs all over the world, all of his ballroom that he built in there in the White House, you can't enjoy it no more. Right? I hear he's got a bunker as well, so he may plan to go underground, you know. But the point is that he wants to be above ground, and showing off all the wealth and thing that he has and enjoying it. And not only him, the people that dominate this world and live in a completely different world to most of us, who are enjoying it every day in the most elaborate way. They will lose out when they destroy the world. But that is a gamble that we are playing there. But the authoritarian, the power that can stop the United States is the equivalent of authoritarianism, and yet we do not want to give up that flawed liberal democratic system that would guard us against an authoritarian who would be very bad to us too. That is the paradox and the problem there. That is the moment that I think we are at now, and we are still working it out, of how do we deal with this desperate condition that imperialism is in. Because that's what Trump manifests. Trump manifests desperation. I will mash up the world if you try to challenge me in dominating and saying I want Greenland and I want Canada and I not saying that you want Barbados too. Okay? So he is at the point where he is getting desperate and saying things that he ought not to be saying. And the people in England, the fellow in Canada particularly, who is very wise prime minister, he's saying you're doing foolishness, man, because you undermine what we stand for. Next thing you know, unless you might have done it right, the next thing you make an alliance with Putin, and that's where you stop.
Wow. Yes, just as I expected, a tour de force on imperialism and the context. But I know you stopped there at Russia, but I wondered if you could give us a little bit more of possible responses. I know I heard you say, well, we don't know exactly, we're grappling with the current situation, but if you had to advise global leaders, especially from the South, what could be our response?
Yeah, actually, the section that I went over then too quickly, when I said that there was the new revolution, that there was the new revolution that people should be looking at in relation to that won't come back with the same concept of socialism. I have been doing some thinking in recent times, and most recent, I haven't written as much as I would have liked to, partly because I had certain domestic things to deal with, but I've written things that will be influential in, I think, for a long time. And in some of those now, I have put some of that thinking in place. And the body that is inspiring me a lot in terms of that new thinking is our own West Indian revolutionary thinker, C.L.R. James. He has a concept, and I heard some of you all saying it without putting it in a philosophical category. Free creative activity as necessity. Now, that is something that is a part of a way that communists see the future too, because there is freedom from necessity, freedom from having to look after your clothing and your housing and your food, and you can live like the richest on earth, the aristocracy, like the royal family don't worry about what clothes they got put on, or whether they got food in the fridge, or whether they have a job. They just live. And that is what you're hoping that you can achieve for mankind. So it's freedom from necessity. But the way that James puts it is free creative activity as necessity, which tells you also what people can be doing. When I saw the activity during Carifesta, all these little activity, people doing all kinds of things, and they're living off of it. That was a kind of peep into free creative activity as necessity. Suppose the whole economy was like that. And these people, I know that you still have to think about how you can raise capital for loans to do big important things for infrastructure and all that, and hospitals and so on. But it is and you all were earlier in the discussion tonight talking about freedom. So it's to free man from that prison and let him just produce in order to live. And James is very much into that because James was anti-authoritarian. James had to, well, Stalin wanted to kill James. You understand? He killed Trotsky. Well, he didn't get James, but and James was to the left of Trotsky. And that is one part of it, but the other part of it is when I mentioned the Marimba Ani, that you have to include the philosophies of the South, and particularly African philosophy, in informing development policy programs for the future. It is that we, in our racism and the dominance of the racism, neglected that part of the contribution of humanity, and it therefore pulled away the humanity in the kinds of transformation that we were seeking. And it became too regimented, too harsh, too non-human. You should never be in a developmental process in which you forget that the people are human. Grenada Revolution is a big example of that. When I was in my radical organizational days, and we used to see some of the guys coming up from the People's Revolutionary Government here on visits. These fellas carrying out government business and they got no stipends. They got no per diem like all the civil servants that travel nowadays for any of our other governments. Men coming up here and fainting and things from not having food, begging you to buy a lunch for them and all that kind of stuff. What happens some years later in the revolution? The revolution cannot feed itself, and they suffer from stress and burnout, and they get psychological problems that want to kill each other. There are people that have written on that to say that was the critical thing in the breakdown of that revolution, nothing to do with any Stalinism versus nobody else or anything like that. That it was to do with just tiredness and exhaustion. And men were coming in a conference room and putting the revolver on the table and all that because they're so annoyed with the other person on the other side. And they mash up the self. But we saw that at a human level with people. Basic things. The women can't go home and look after the children. Tell them that they got to be revolutionary discipline. So you got to go to meet it. Or you take the children home bawling for milk. You can't do those kind of things. You have to remember that is what the whole thing is about. It's about people. So the people have to remain at the center of the thing. I think that James is very conscious of that. But I don't want to lock it in only to one person like in that way. But I'm saying that I think that it's also locked into the way that Africans say a village is important, and that the community is important, and all that was lost in the regimental way in which we attempted to transform societies in the 20th century. And that has to be a part of the new thinking. And therefore, a lot of these societies that call themselves revolutionary now, that are hangovers from the 20th century, they got changed too. Because they're carrying the same baggage that was a negative in the 20th century. And if we can work with all of these things, plus recognize that there are people, if you have certain ideas that want to knock you down, and you have to have the power to defend yourself, that is where the authoritarian understanding comes in. That sometimes you got to link with people that you don't agree with fully, but why are the Chinese the biggest enemies of the Americans, of Trump? It's because they're defending something else, defending something different. It don't matter that both of them are authoritarian, or not the Americans, but that the Chinese are authoritarian, or that Putin is authoritarian, and that Putin got a whole lot of billionaire friends. There's something that Putin doing that make him link with the Iranians. Why? And the Americans don't like it. I think we should think on those things.
Well, it's interesting that you say, the basis is going to be in African philosophy, in African knowledge, which makes me glad that the next movement after this one is on the one on indigenous knowledge, which is the next logical question after leadership and freedom. But I want to wrap up soon and ask whether there are any questions from anyone here or from the chat, from the Zoom?
Yes, good afternoon, Dr. Belle. I'm very interested in that 30 years that you spoke about, where you expected to see change, and then there was the conquering neoliberalism, and you talked about the dichotomy of Obama being a symbol of the fall of that, the cracks in that neoliberalism, as well as its savior in some regards. And it feels like we are oftentimes caught in this dichotomy. For instance, we go back and we look at the Maroons having won a certain level of freedom and then creating treaties with the British to make sure the others did not get their freedom. Excuse me. So I'm interested in your thoughts about getting out of that loop. And in the break, we were having a discussion about the challenge of establishing ourselves within this order or creating a separate order. So I'm interested in your thoughts about how do we escape that what seems to be a consistent cycle, if I make sense to you.
It seems to be influencing by both.
It is like the challenge between assimilation and revolution. Those who wanted to separate from in the civil rights movement and those who wanted to integrate.
All right, something that you recognize when you live long enough, okay, is something called survival. And I remember Glenroy Strachan, now late, looking at me and saying, "George, you are a survivor." Because, of course, his political career was crushed in a more total way. You see, I was the leader of the Workers' Party of Barbados, but I was talking in the elections up to last election, and people listening to me, I think, okay? And some people on the left would say that that means that I'm a survivor, that I navigated all of them problems and still my head up seemingly above water. Though Joy now would have said that I give up too much, right? But that is where I'm trying to, I had to handle both. And one of the things was to do with my domestic experience, the experience of my life. My wife died at 41, I was the same age as her. I had to bring up three children, little children on my own. And I never could imagine anything more terrible than that in my life, that I would be a single parent bringing up three children. And I had to take a decision at the university that what I would do is that I would concentrate on leadership. I was head of department for 12 years and dean for 8 years. And that's 20 years. That's right, yes. Out of almost 40 years at the university, 38. So a lot of my time at the University of West Indies has been in leadership. I was on academic board more than Hilary Beckles when I retired. I knew the guy that was principal when most of them people up there, they know him, a fellow that looked like a vampire. Okay, a chemist from Jamaica. They know all the people after that. But I used to sit down there. He was a chain smoker. So when you went to his house, he would have cigarette, what they call them, the ashtrays all over the house, so that he could out his cigarette all over the house. When he was conducting academic board, he used to write down everything that he said. So we used to be in there up to 8 o'clock at night because he's writing down everything that he said. By going through that and making choices, I said, if I'm a leader in the university, it's going to be difficult for them to do me anything. Okay? And I think that worked. Because when I was a head, I was dean. But you know what I lost out on? On all that I knew about Barbados, I should have been writing down in these big books that other people have written. Because that is where my name is not. My name is in a whole lot of articles and things, but it's not in these big books that I should have written. And I gotta write many books. All the talk that I got here, so no, it could be a book. Okay? I ain't write the books. It's a big, big regret. But I did it for my children. And I survived. Because I might have been doing that and got sick or get a heart attack or a crash or something, and next thing you know, I ain't in university no more. The other thing was that in the, I don't know if I'm answering your question properly, but when the Grenada Revolution occurred, I said to the guys that I was working with, and there was a little tension in there because I was a Harrisonian working with a whole set of radical Commonwealthians. And I think they looked at me with a bitter suspicion. Right, this Harrisonian coming here to dominate us, you know? And in the crisis of Grenada, I told them that we should launch a political party that would participate in the electoral system of this liberal democracy to show them that we were not just people that come here to break up things. And I won the argument. And they launched the Workers' Party of Barbados. And when I reflect on it, I think that was an error. But that's why I did at the time. It was to try to that the left organization would survive. But it was even logically inconsistent with revolutionary theory. You don't build a party and forget the movement. The movement is the bigger thing. The party should be within the movement. But I say, left, forget about Manali and go and build the party, and that was the mistake. Party lasts about 4 years or something like that. Joy would know. And I when I look back at it, I thinking that, you know, we shouldn't do that. Of course, I got advice from some very experienced revolutionaries who told me that, okay, you could do that because in Barbados, you had two social democratic parties, and the presence of a distinctly Marxist socialist party would bring a different conversation. That was from one view. There was another view among Caribbean, the French, who I think they felt that maybe I was going the wrong way, but they didn't say anything because they didn't want to disrupt us. The Cubans would have been completely against it, but they went along with us, right? The Cubans thought we should join the DLP or the BLP. Yeah, should join the DLP or the BLP. They were against any party like that. That was so right through all the time. People thought that the Cubans were pushing those kind of parties. The Cubans were not pushing them. They were for joining the big party that could give their revolution support by having state power. Now, somebody like a Chetty Jagan, who was a Marxist, but with a mass base, he told us to build the party. We had that discussion going on, and I was thrown up as the leader at the time of the Grenada Revolution. I was the leader all the time because I was in England when they were starting that organization. That they were reading my material. And when I came back to Barbados, then they pushed me into the Politburo and the Central Committee and all that. Next thing, when the Grenada thing happened, then I was pushed up to leadership. And I was the face to that the people in Barbados would have known, you know, as this fellow from the university and so on. But in that difficult situation of choice, I made the wrong choice. But I am hoping that I'm coming close to saying something that would be useful to the question that you asked. But it is that you do have these tricky situations where you have to be able to be around to continue fighting. And sometimes that looks like if you're making compromises when it's to do with survival, because if you don't make the little compromise, you disappear. They disappear you. Okay? When I read some of the things in the MI6 and all that kind of thing, them fellas were watching you all the time. And I don't know how much damage they did to me that I even know about up to now, and to my family. But that's the price that you pay, you know? And when you get old like me now, I can see all of these things. As I say, that when there's a Hegelian dialectical position to, as you get closer to the end, you start to understand the beginning.
Yeah,
Margaret.
I'm going to pass on to Joy, but I wanted to just read you one of my principles of revolution says exactly what you just said there. And it is, my first priority, my first loyalty in the struggle is to protect the ability to struggle and then to struggle. Joy.
Napoleon said that you have to feed the army. The army got to live off his belly.
Revolution.
Right.
Professor? No, I just saying it in terms of a respect for the
Yeah,
intellect
yeah.
and the memory and the bringing together of, well, whole last century and so on. And this brings me to the question that you alluded to it, but you didn't think. And I'm not following it very closely, but something that you said, you said America has the most powerful military in the world. I was wondering if that still stands given China's position. And one of the question that I'm asking is, from your analysis and your observation and so on, where is the conflict with America and China going within the war that's going on in the Middle East?
In my view, the Chinese are completely opposed to the Americans. But they have a very long view. Oh, sorry. I believe that the Chinese are completely opposed to the Americans, right? But they have a long view. The Chinese feel that they're building socialism 200 years from now. You understand? Because they have Confucians as well, you see. When you go back to the actual victories of the revolutions in China and in Russia, the two leaders said some very different things. Lenin said, "We shall now build the socialist revolution." Mao Zedong said, "The Chinese people have stood up." Okay? He wasn't concerned with whether it was socialism or anything. Matter of fact, you may have to edit this too. Mao Zedong said that dogma is worse than dog shit, because at least the dog can eat its own shit. Okay? And he did a whole lot of radical readjusting of Marxism and applying it to the Chinese situation. Now, when I left Arts and College and went to Mona, I was a Maoist. Okay? And so all them Jamaican radicals and things considered I was a Maoist. But I met Trevor Monroe up there. I next say, I ended up doing the orthodox thing that they were doing. But the Mao has a lot of the kind of things that CLRGN has in terms of its flexibility and so on. And trying to get back to you, what age now hitting me? Yeah. Right, the armies, right. The Chinese, as I'm completely convinced that the Chinese are building themselves up to take care of where they always want to go, surviving, okay, and defeating themselves better than most people in the world. But they have retained that authoritarian thing because they're in their logic. The Communist Party is what will keep the thing going to achieve their thing in 200 years. And it is also the root of their having power. And that if they give up everything like Gorbachev in Russia, the whole thing can go down. You see? And in that sense, I think that they are superior in their understanding of the struggle. I just use the word the struggle than the Russians. The Russians were so influenced by their political culture, the Tsarism and things, that they couldn't do anything different, which is what Rosa Luxemburg said about Lenin. You know, that party that you build in there, that party is going to eventually mash up everything. And then Lenin said it about Stalin. Lenin said Stalin is too capricious, and you gotta wash him because he can mash up everything, you know, and so on. So it was a growing thing inside of them. The Cubans, Castro said that he don't have to do nothing that Gorbachev did because he never had a Stalin. But that ain't quite true. But that is what he said. So there's those differences. I do not believe that the Chinese army is the biggest, probably in numbers, army. But I do not think that they're better than the Americans. But the Americans are not good soldiers. You know, I almost became a soldier. Vietnam was a good example of the weakness of the American army. Because during Vietnam, all them soldiers, most of them was just smoking marijuana and shooting the officers in the back. When you're an officer, you're running forward all the time, and men behind you with rifles, there's a danger that you will get shot in your back if the fellas think that you're doing foolishness, you know. And some of them were so high that they would think anything you're doing is foolishness. But the Chinese, the Americans have developed technologies that are tremendous. Because look at what they did in Venezuela. They say that when they picked up his name Maduro, right? When they picked up Maduro, by the time they got in his inner chamber, after this got steel doors and thing, you know, he didn't even know they were in there. No, how the hell to do that? You know, the whole place went black. The whole place got blacked out for one. So they were able to mash up all of the computer systems and everything. The helicopters went in without being attacked at all. They had Cuban bodyguards and everything, and it still went through. Because of the tremendous technology that they have, so they can almost beat anybody in the world. But I think that you see, when they went in Korea, they thought they could beat everybody in the world there too. And when every time they shoot down, they see more Chinese coming over the border. And that's what beat them then. Too many Chinese, man. Yeah. And of course, with the Vietnamese, that was a real example of anti-colonial struggle. The willpower that you can break them. If you go to Cuba and look at the technology of the Vietnamese in terms of guerrilla warfare, you see all the little pieces of wood and things that they developed to mash up the Americans. You know, I don't want to oversimplify, but if you go in the museums and see the technologies that them fellas developed, and they were poor without anything, and they beat the American army. So the American army is, in that broad sense, the best and most powerful army on the face of the earth, but they can be defeated, and that is what they tend to suffer amnesia about. Tell me the last war that they won. They lost in Vietnam, they lost in Korea, they lost in Afghanistan, they lost in Iraq, and they're losing in Iran too. They've lost every war. Yet they're supposed to be this great military. They marched the wrong way too anyhow. You see Americans marching, something wrong with this. Something funny about that. I don't understand how they march. I prefer how the British march, although the British are suspect too.
All right. I think
you are deleted to do a thing, right?
editing.
Because I gonna say something controversial thing, but you know, one of my mentors, Roy O.J., who was PVC for years. Huh? Sorry. Roy O.J., who was PVC and a mentor to me. He used to say this to us. He taught me political philosophy, history of political thought, really. The university is the kingdom of the mind. He was an old fighter pilot as well. He used to be in the back of the fighter planes, rear gunner. When the planes got shot down, most of the time that tail used to get let off. When he went up, he didn't know if he was going back home. But the man survived. He lived to 100 years. Roy J. used to say, first of all, is the kingdom of mind. He used to tell us, a university is a place of controversy. So when they tell you want to don't stir up the place, that's what you're supposed to be doing. So when I tell you that delete, in truth, in fact, I don't know what I should be doing. I should be saying all kind of controversial things. Otherwise, I lose in a third of what I should be saying. So I, in a sense, I was brought up in a tradition where he said, be controversial. And I took it to heart. The other thing that he said is, he's a soldier, Air Force man. He said, go to where you hear the rifles. You understand what he's saying? Go to where you hear the rifles. If you hear bam, 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 don't go the other direction. Go where the rifles are. Go in there and fight. Because but there's a wisdom in that too. Because if you go where the rifles are not, somebody might see you as a deserter and shoot. So if you go to where the rifles are, you will find your unit because there's going to be two sides fighting there, and one of them is yours. So you said, go to where the rifles are, where you hear the rifles. Go to where you hear the rifles. Go to where you hear the rifles. University is the kingdom of the mind. The university is the place of controversy.
And I think that that's an appropriate place to end this session. The university is the kingdom of the mind and controversy. I'm going to ask you to give Dr. George Belle a round of applause.